Hey everyone, welcome back and thank you for being here. If you're in my fall 2025 class, I'm sorry for the delay. Um, I've been really busy. Your essays have been remarkable. Um, and this is the episode for utilitarianism. Sorry about that. I should have said that first. But there was a big gap in this semester where I got behind on grading from recording the previous lectures and didn't even get this lecture recorded in time um, for the modern philosophy, ancient philosophy combo exam. In future semesters, that should be split into two exams. I haven't told any of my current students that, but if you're watching this in a future semester, which it's intended for as well, then then you'll be hitting this one on time at the end of the modern unit. I wanted to include it for multiple reasons in this fall semester. Those students don't have, they've already had the test. They don't have to listen to this, Winchester. Sorry. Um, my German Shepherd has skin issues and he sometimes soothes those skin issues by licking them, and that makes them worse. You're okay. I changed his food and hopefully it's better for him. He's looking at me funny. Let me stop and figure that out. Okay, I'm back. Um, so this is the series on utilitarianism, not just the episode. And um, Winchester seems to be better. Yeah, good boy. Utilitarianism is the first form of consequentialism, like historically. Um, Together, consequentialism and utilitarianism um, represent, constitute, are one of the three um, major normative theories for determining what the right course of action is. Normative meaning what should you do or what ought you to do, um, and it's prescriptive as well. So instead of just describing the world or being descriptive, right, stating a set of sentences or statements that represent factual cases about states of affairs within the world or laws or what have you. Um, some laws, moral laws, like in Kant, right, are still prescriptive instead of descriptive. Um, but then you use descriptive facts about human nature or psychology or uh, proclivities or sociology, like proclivities for deviance in various societies with various conditions, which is always um, it's always contingent. I'm a fan of anti-positivism with the social sciences, meaning that like all of the quantitative studies are highly contextual and dependent on other factors within a society that can change pretty frequently. Um, anyway, even Kant would use those factors in determining what. Do you want to play? Is that what it is? In determining um, the bed is right next to my desk, and we have this little, I'll show you this thing. He loves it. So he's just laying there chewing on it. Um, and Mill also, sorry. So Kant even leaves room for this descriptive area, but it's a normative theory. The other normative theories, so the big three are deontology, utilitarianism, or consequentialism. That's the second one. When we're doing this series, we've already had in my intro class, we've already had deontology with Kant in the last series or on the podcast, whatever you're doing. And this might be useful in like a contemporary ethical issues course or an applied ethics. I I'll say right now, I don't have enough background in any of the ethical theories to teach like moral philosophy one, probably because I don't have secondary resources for most of them. I just know the primary sources pretty well. Um, yeah, he's just full of energy. That's all this is. He wants to play. Oh, good boy. The third one is virtue ethics with Aristotle. And the introduction we'll read from John Schroyer, which is in a collection between two of the first utilitarians, Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. Um, in that order, about a generation or a half century between them, if I remember correctly. I've got the dates here. So yeah, there were 36 years between their books, 1825 and 1861. Um, so Mill came after, and we'll have two chapters from Mill, but the introduction will cover both of them from John Troyer. It's really helpful, and it'll also cover different secondary sources, different formulations of the problems of utilitarianism, the distribution problem, and the sensitivity problem. Well, that's actually the same thing. Sorry, the measurement problem and the distribution problem. So we'll get to those. I'm not. It's kind of hard to explain what those are before I've talked about the other stuff. I'm still trying to lay the ground, the connections, the foundation of connections, and in the context of other philosophers, the history of philosophy, history of social sciences, the utility of it in an intro course, in multiple different semesters and contexts, and there's the word utility. Remember in Aristotle has friendships of utility. But the utilitarians want to say that utility is and pleasure are the same thing, and that to use either word is inadequate because it simplifies it. Um, like if we call it pleasure, you think it's just like indulgent, and if we call it utility, you think it's boring. Um, so we'll do that. We have some guiding questions. We have a lot of guiding questions. Um, and we have uh, notes, answers to those guiding questions from last year, from 2024. Um, from fall 2024. And what else? Um, when we move on to American pragmatism, which I'm going to try to get done today, but I don't know, hopefully. Um, with James at least, I'm going to try to at least start on James. I think I can do it. Um, we'll read an introduction in that one as well. I think that one's by GM Dent. Let me look. Let me pause. I'm going to stand up, so I'm going to pause this. It's oversized sweater season, except next week it's supposed to be back in the 70s, which was silly, and I don't like it. So it's not GM Dent. I'm sure that person did something else. It's GH Bird, kind of close. And anyway, when we read that introduction, a big overview in pragmatism is the utilitarian component to it, or the instrumentalism, the consequentialism of it. Um, but that has to do more with fulfillment than with calculating an outcome. And even in utilitarianism, we'll see that between Jeremy Bentham, the first utilitarian, and John Stuart Mill, the second, we'll see that the first, Bentham, is more about calculation, and that's called act-utilitarianism. For each act, you would calculate it. And there are more variations that I'm not as nuanced with or not as versed in, like average act versus general act. And these are in the notes. So luckily, I studied them at one point last year and have answers to them. They're in the introduction as well. So I'll get better at them through rereading them and figuring them out. But um, the reason I think it's important to study utilitarianism, okay, again, there's another variation where what you want to So the difference between this like generalized utilitarianism is it combines the categorical imperative in with the utilitarian maximization principle, because that would be part of like the autonomy of reason. And but it differs from a rule utilitarianism or a pure deontology, because it takes into account some overarching long-term pattern of choices. So a series of rules that you follow might, or a series of acts that you follow either way, might continue to deteriorate with fewer and fewer options. But if you take like the prisoner's dilemma, if you take the lesser option for like a day or a year or something, you might open up a wider set of options. That's what generalized utilitarianism would be able to overcome and recommend in contrast with act and rule. So I guess I remember more of it than I, no, I don't. But I was able to explain some of it, and we'll do more of it. What is the difference between utilitarianism and consequentialism then? Let's start there, I guess. Actually, I'm not done explaining why this is important. So it's also important. Why do I teach it? Because I don't agree with it. Not, I do agree with it, but I think it's part of a rounded conception of normative ethics and wisdom. And oh, you're not even looking at these things. Well, for the most part, I didn't want you to. Um, but now's a good time for you to start seeing. There we go. Um, so yeah, if you're while I'm talking, you could be reading some of these notes if you wanted to. So why do I teach utilitarianism if I think it's kind of flat? Or I think my favorite is Aristotle. When I first started philosophy, it was Kant, because I was quite a rationalist. I believed that there was a universal language, and just like I guess I had essences on my life, and so I believed in discernment. I thought that that would needed to be possible. And with discernment comes a sort of teleological, or at least an ontic, or even an ontological essential structure to consciousness or to reality. Anyway, I think that utilitarianism's problems are so hard to overcome. Like, we'll look at some of those too, but forced organ harvest, or um, the hangman problem, the sheriff and the hangman. I don't know if it's called that, but there's a sheriff in a town with an angry mob, and they want him to hang somebody, and they'll get more pleasure than the man will suffer from dying, or the woman, whatever. So utilitarianism, at least act utilitarianism, wouldn't be able to overcome that, but rule utilitarianism would. And for the forced organ harvest, there's other issues at stake too, about like who the people are and what their potential consequences for their futures are in their lives. Like, if the one person, so the forced organ harvest is you have three people that are going to die in, say, 12 hours or the next day. One needs a heart, one needs a lung, one needs a liver, things you don't have extra of. Um, and there's a healthy person who has all three of those. And so you could kill one person and save three, or you could trade one person and save three. Um, so Bentham was a politician and a legalist, meaning he created laws and governed. Um, his theories were about like making choices for large groups of people. of what was best for their interests. It was kind of economical. And I think that might be my problem with it, is I think there's some good ethical postmodern, I guess you'd say, formulations or critiques or alternatives or ventures or exit points, new paths, journeys that you can take. In Derrida, for example, who writes kind of in his later life in different formulations like forgiveness and hospitality and the gift and Cora, about a sort of spatial and economic open-ended relationship. And economic meaning outside of an exchange economy. And so you're like, a gift is not something you want. Like you shouldn't um expect anything in return for a gift. Otherwise it's a bargain, not a gift. Even if that return is like, oh, I think they'll give me a gift later, or I would be upset. Like if you're scorekeeping, that's economic. That's not and that's not what hospitality is either. So you have to have genuine ethics or love or care or relationships, you have to get out of the economic. And I think that's like probably my main critique of utilitarianism is the calculation, the exchange. I teach it because, like I said, it's one of the big three. Um, it's relevant to pragmatism, which I am a fan of, and I think pragmatism fixes the issues with it. Because the other aspect about consequentialism is not just that to look at the consequences, but also to maximize some sets of outcomes. Aristotle, for instance, also looks at consequences. It's an activistic. Um, but Aristotle doesn't exchange or it's more of a feeling, Aristotle. And with pragmatism, I'd say it's probably also more of a feeling, but there's some slimming in pragmatism. So that's kind of the cross trajectory between Aristotle, Kant, and then utilitarianism with Bentham and Mill, Aristotle's virtue ethics, Kant is deontology, deontology. It's like rule following or right comes before the good, law, and duty, universality. With Aristotle, there's exceptions and there's enactivism, but there's not like that calculation. So it's really, they really are all three different. And there's a lot of other consideration about activity and habit and practice in Aristotle, character formation, the habit as, anyway, we've covered all that in the other lectures. So consequentialism seeks to maximize some kind of outcome. It looks at outcomes and it seeks to maximize a set of goods. It seeks to maximize a set of intrinsic goods. So different theories of the good. A theory of the good is just some assertion or doctrine about what the set of goods is. Very doctrinal, not very dialectical. Could be determined through dialectic, but not something that I mean, you could cut your teeth on it, but on different possibilities for the theory of the good. Um, Utilitarianism started with the theory of utility, that pleasure and the presence of pleasure and the absence of pain is the one intrinsic good. And it's the same thing. The presence of pleasure is the same as the absence of pain. And the absence of pain is the same as the presence of pleasure. Or at least they exist on a continuum together and can be calculated as such. Not only, this is called hedonism. And usually hedonism means it's very similar to egoism, except egoism might be willing to suffer and just do whatever it wants. Hedonism is, I mean, both are rational if that's what you take as rational, right? Like nobody who's doing those things and thinks they're rational is going to stop doing them because you tell them they're irrational, because it depends on the perspective you take up and the assumptions you have about what's right and what's wrong. But the difference between hedonism and egoism is that there would be a greater pursuit of single-minded ends with one intrinsic good for hedonism. Whereas for egoism, the one intrinsic good would be doing whatever you want, whether it gives you pleasure or pain, I think. And in hedonism, the one intrinsic good is, again, presence of pleasure and absence of pain. It's also self-interested, though. That's the difference between, it does not mean like this kind of like crashing out by pursuing whatever immediate pleasures are in front of you. That's not hedonism. That's not sustainable. And in other words, hedonism is not an instantaneous calculation. It is a long-term calculation. And so there's another issue, not only of measurement, not only of distribution, but of foreseeability or predictability. I think people believe that like AI will be able to predict things better. And if we have more like I thought if we had more sensors or if we had more reports and faster, um, uh, let me say this differently. I remember not AI, this isn't about AI. I remember thinking that a central command economy might be as responsive as a market if that centralized command economy had a diverse, like very like densely proliferated system of sensors that could give it information and feedback to. This goes again to like me thinking that things are calculable and rational like a long time ago. I'm not sure that's ethically good anymore. That might overcome the issue of um, predicting the future. But the three-body problem also tells us that it's hard to see that far just because of the way things, at least with gravity, if anything within, how is this relevant here? The three-body problem is one, a really cool show on Netflix, and two, I think it won awards. And two, a problem in physics where, say you have a solar system with three suns and there's a planet trapped between them, it won't ever pick up a stable cycle that could be predicted. And yeah, it just won't have any kind of pattern. The pattern stops. Or at least we haven't been able to figure it out yet. So we still have predictability issues. We have measurement issues, which is like, how do I determine what my pleasure compares with your pleasure? And how do I calculate across different subjective experiences? And we have the distribution problem, which is that in the instance of the hangman and the forced organ harvest, there is no, when you calculate the greatest happiness and least pain across the most people possible, there is no sensitivity to making sure that anyone follows a set minimum of um, receives a set minimum of care or value or respect or survival or pleasure or utility or resources, anything you're distributing, any intrinsic good that you think is should be calculated. So it's not sensitive to where it goes, right? This is also evident with the utility monster, where somebody, I mean, I think my preferred version of the utility monster is just like a really grateful person, someone who's, I don't want to say poor because poor people actually need resources, but the utility monster is somebody who always gets more pleasure than anybody else from every good, no matter how much they have of it. A grateful person probably does the same thing. And if that gratitude leads to more energy and more productivity in society, this would be James's argument in pragmatism, is that you should lean into that kind of thing. You should lean into the affective components that provides energy, how grateful you are, where you distribute that. Anyway, the utility monster would get all the society's resources. Everybody else would starve because every kind of act calculation was distributed there. So you can come up with more and more rules about distribution, but then it's like, okay, I thought this thing was supposed to help us streamline and differentiate between competing hierarchies of computation and calculation and consideration. Again, in Aristotle, you just make a choice, and it's hopefully the right one, and it continually improves. And as you get older and fail more, you get better. Um, but I mean, I guess in every ethical theory, there are always competing hierarchies and considerations. But I think deontology and consequentialism spend more time trying to parse them than is feasible. And that's another issue with it. All right, one, what is hedonism? That's hedonism. We talked about it. Two, what is the difference between instrumental and intrinsic goods? I think this has been obvious, but instrumental, something you want slash is good for something else, another reason slash purpose. Method, an instrument, a means, a stepping stone in a long chain of goods, and extrinsic. So family, friends, depending on your theory, family, friends, money, health, living, knowledge. All of these things would be instrumental for utilitarianism and for hedonism because the only intrinsic good, and that's part of the calculability of utilitarianism, is by reducing it to one thing, one intrinsic good, you can uh, come to swifter conclusions, more clear conclusions. Um, but then like you start trading family or sacrificing money or your health or shortening your life. It doesn't make sense. And then intrinsic. Intrinsic goods like are your like purpose or your goal, your end, your reason, the final good, the end in itself. In deontology, people are intrinsic goods. In Aristotle, friendship of care is intrinsic good, intrinsically good. Friendships of care are intrinsically good. Some of these include pleasure, the absence of pain, and that's what they call happiness or utility. Um, a good will for other, these are other theories, good character, knowledge, intellect, wisdom, health, justice, family, friends, life, time, freedom, equality. All right, number three. How is utilitarianism different from consequentialism? Consequentialism is a theory of right action, like normative ethics, that seeks to maximize an intrinsic good impartially across a group given personhood. So you're maximizing whatever set of people you consider people. That can include the environment. That can include animals. my personhood includes animals equally with humans. It includes domestic animals equally with humans, livestock animals with reverence and need, and plants with tending and respect and reverence as well, um, and minimal harm. Utilitarianism is a specific, there's a cool article, I'll say it here. I took it, I found this article from Dr. Robert Tierney, who's a professor at UHD, and I took moral philosophy one with him. So a lot of what I learned about utilitarianism and deontology comes from him. He's a lawyer as well, but but and so, right? But from the moral philosophy one, and so from because he's a lawyer, I took philosophy of law with him. And philosophy of law, one of the things, I think I wrote my term paper on it. Very last minute. Don't do this, guys. It was enough to get an A in the course, but because I had buffered from before. Um, Still a good paper. Do Trees Have Standing by Christopher Stone? Should trees have standing? Yeah. The argument is basically that trees should have legal personhood and they should have like a conservatorship with assigned lawyers and funding systems that are like not appropriated through another funding system. They are like a trust, especially one through damages to them, right? So the California wildfires, for example, would get a group of lawyers to sue the energy companies for causing climate change. And then the Redwood Forest or whatever's been burning, or LA. LA did burn, and they should probably receive some of, but not any out of the trees funding. They should receive additional appropriations or reappropriations from from the companies. Um, and the companies will always profit, or they have always profited more than they've been made to pay. So that also has to change. Anyway, the point is the trees would do something like that, sue for damages against them because there have been damages to the natural environment, except it wouldn't be go to it wouldn't go to a human. There would be a human making decisions about it for the trust or for the foundation or whatever, but it would still be decentralized. There would be multiple, there would be like, it wouldn't be one nonprofit managing all the trees in the United States. It would be like one tree having one lawyer managing it. So you'd have like a couple hundred lawyers suing the companies for appropriations because should trees have standing? Um, their roots intelligently seek out. There are recent philosophical books about the sentience of nature, of plants, of that phylum, philo, of that kingdom. No, phylo's below kingdom. Plants are a different kingdom. Mycelium's a different kingdom too. I think we're close. I think mycelium is closer to humans than it is to plants. Um, but it's still living. It's not inorganic. I don't give inorganic matter personhood, but I do think that it constitutes an important role in the presentation of phenomena, um, and that it shares quantum phenomenology with consciousness. And that comes from Whitehead, Spinoza, and Sartre, probably. Deleuze. Anyway, those are different considerations, right? The production process of consciousness is different is a different parsing and grouping, right? Like that's equally distributed across all extension or world. Agencies are not equally distributed, but the sentience within agencies, because inorganic matter does not have agencies, the sentience within agencies um, is unevenly distributed because plants have, they do have some, they have more than inorganic matter, and they have, I wouldn't say that inorganic matter has no sentience because it is carrying the affective momentum of the just the flows of things that are happening. And so it has causation and movement, but that would be a further rethinking of sentience beyond what animals have, which is a sort of impulse. I think it's more than that. They're very intelligent. I think they can understand language, and I think that like they can instruct their young, right? I don't think there's any clear distinction between humans and animals, except for degree. This will be important in Dewey too, because Dewey takes evolutionary biology as a starting point of a live creature for aesthetic experience. So he'll come to a definition of aesthetic gratification or artistic fulfillment or spiritual fulfillment from the ups and downs of the strife of being an animal and suffering and surviving and suffering and surviving. Disintegration and consummation, he calls it. Dewey's instrumental. Anyway, instrumentalism is meaning causal, strictly causal. Meaning is, for Dewey, meaning is causation. You understand meaning when you perceive the unity of cause and effect in one motion. So anyway, no clear distinction between humans and animals. Some degree, well, I really need to do a better job of not eating animals. But it's strange because I don't think I would. Part of my consideration for like on a dairy, for example, or if you had a dairy cow and you milked it, eventually it would pass away, or eventually it would become sickly or old and need. And if it got too sick, you would not be able to make use of its resources properly. Um, and so it's like a sort of bad stewardship not to eat edible things. But then, like my dogs and my cat, I would not eat them once they pass away. I would give them a sort of, like I said, equal personhood where I want them to have a burial and a memory and a sacred body. I give them sacredness in a way that I don't give livestock animals sacredness. But in a way I do because I take reverence for their death and I try to make use of the resources. So I don't know there's some kind of difference between like why I wouldn't eat my dog. Um, and questions like that are where we have the different ethical theories because it's like, do you calculate that with utility? Did I calculate that with intuition or just conviction or bias, prejudice, a set of laws, deontology? There was some reasoning about categories of personhood, which is where we got off on all this, talking about the personhood of trees. And because whatever your definition of personhood is, that will inform how you calculate or distribute or determine the distribution of the instrumental good. Or sorry, the intrinsic good, whatever the intrinsic goods are. Will also, I mean, it's another way of saying this, but if the intrinsic good is pleasure in the absence of pain, and the person and your set of personhood says that livestock animals are not equal to their pain does not count as much as human pain for whatever reason, which doesn't make sense, then you're more willing to use them as instruments. Or, put differently, if you're more willing to use them as instruments, that's probably because you're not giving them equal personhood. Not an end in itself, not a kingdom of ends. And that's where deontology thrives. Okay, utilitarianism is a specific, the original form of consequentialism that takes hedonism as its theory of the good. And these are, we're going to go from 3 to 5 now, but I think 4 will make more sense if we start with 5. What is the difference between act-utilitarianism and rule-utilitarianism? Um, excuse me. We talked about this before, earlier. In act-utilitarianism, it's the most calculated net utility in each act, whereas in rule-utilitarianism, you always follow general rules that are justified by the greatest happiness principle. So like we have law for Mill argued like I think we'll read this in chapter 2. If not, it's in the introduction. But I think it's also in the excerpt that we read from utilitarianism. Again, we're reading from a collection called the Classical Utilitarians. The introduction is in there. And then Mill's book, written in 1861, or published then, called Utilitarianism, that's just the title of the book, um, is included in that collection. It also has a few excerpts and other responses and what have you. Um, anyway, he says that like we have the laws that we have because they generally produce the most happiness for everybody in a stable way. There's some consistency. Contrast this with like depending too much on the laws, because I was reading an article recently about stupidity. I think if you have really convenient systems, it's easy for the populace to become unenlightened or to not be thinking about the things they're doing. And like that's the kind of stupidity that led to Nazi Germany in the post I was reading. Um, there were 2 different authors who wrote about stupidity. I think they were like social psychologists or sociologists more than philosophers, but it was just a post on Instagram. My Holy Terrain Art Instagram is nicely curated with a good algorithm for writers and philosophy pages. And then my private one is all like politics. And it's a good set of politics, like pro-Palestine stuff and um, critiques of liberalism and critiques of vacuous protests. Um, it's a good feed. What is generalized utilitarianism? Generalized utilitarianism is, like I said before, it's a mashup of utilitarianism with a categorical imperative. And this is kind of different. Like, I think we can kind of use rule utilitarianism with something like a consideration of basic threshold duties or threshold rights, and then phronesis in Aristotle to really get different shades or dimensions, contours, aspects, images of a sort of multi polyvalent edge of ethical decision making. Um, but yeah, the generalized utilitarianism avoids like short-term game theory problems where a series of decisions leads to a drastically terrible outcome. based on immediate calculations or immediate rule following and looks at the overarching pattern to see like, okay, well, maybe we take like the stupidest option for 5 turns, and on the 6th turn, we get all these other options back. And it takes us further than we can ever go if we were just following these rules, or if we were just calculating what we think is best. So it takes like a pattern or a law. Next, the two difficulties of utilitarianism are distribution. I've said this before. And we added a third one, which was, I don't even remember. Um, oh, predictability. So distribution, measurement, and predictability. Let's go with that. The three difficulties of utilitarianism. John Troyer's introduction only mentions two. I'm adding the third one, predictability. And distribution is the problem with that. What we mean when we say that distribution is a problem is that utilitarianism fails to distribute the goods properly. Like I said, distribution then is a question of equilibrium, sensitivity, responsiveness, respectivity, allocation. Um, it's not nuanced enough. And when it becomes nuanced enough, like we said, then it just gets messy and hard to use, convoluted. You get hyper legalistic systems with draconic policies and Kafkaesque bureaucracies, yada yada. Um, so utilitarianism is insensitive, unresponsive, insensitive to, unresponsive to, and irrespective of the allocation of goods with no regard to minimum threshold or individual rights. You think of the utility monster. Ooh, the trolley problem. I haven't talked about the trolley problem at all. If you guys have seen The Good Place, or if you haven't, um, I think my old mentor, he had edited a collection on The Good Place, which is pretty cool. But I like to show that clip in my class when I was in person, um, just because of like copyright issues and what have you. You can easily find it on YouTube. Just YouTube The Good Place, the trolley problem. It's pretty graphic. Um, Supposedly the people are not real people, but their suffering is real. I'm sorry, that shouldn't be funny. Um, it's really dark because it wouldn't matter if their suffering wasn't real. That's what the demon says. Spoilers. It's good stuff. You should check it out. The trolley problem just says that like you're on a track, you're on a trolley, and there are people tied to the rails. But there are two paths you can take, but people are tied to both paths. And you can't stop the trolley. And so when I say people are tied, I mean people will die from both paths. There's no path that saves everyone or avoids dirtying your hands. There is no way that you can follow all the negative deontologies, the negative duties. You cannot take any action that would be so. In fact, the deontologist does nothing. There's a switch you have to pull. There's a path that you're on, supposedly. And the Kantian, the deontologist, would change nothing, supposedly, because it would keep their hands clean because they would take no action. Now, this confuses doing and allowing. There's a good article by Philip Foot on medical ethics, abortion in the cases of the mother dying, and whether it's meaningfully different to say that you're taking an active hand in something versus allowing a bad thing to happen through negligence. Again, the stupidity thing is that like people let bad things happen. The majority of people are letting a few bad people do things. All right. Um, so in the trolley problem, The other parameters of it are that the path that you're on is going to kill more people than the path you would turn off to. So let's say like 6 and 1. There's 6 people going to die on the way it's headed. And if you triage, you can change things and go to the one path. Now, deontology won't let you do anything, but utilitarianism will. And really, I think that this issue is more to do with the confusion in deontology between doing and allowing that needs to be fixed, and that what Philippa does there, which is good. I think it's a solution to the trolley. But this has real world applications in things like a plane crash. I don't remember if it was a book I read. I think it was a book I read. The first chapter was a plane crash, and there was, anyway, maybe I triage. In triage, you make decisions about what can be saved and what can't. If you have no idea what's on the field of people dying in front of you from a plane crash, debris everywhere, or you're in a battlefield, say, you have a large number of people that need your help. And you know that one person will take 20 minutes to help, and most people will take like 3 minutes to help, but they'll all die kind of equally quickly. And so you would, at a utilitarian level, calculate and meaningfully calculate. I mean, I think this is actually a case in which utilitarianism is the most immediate, but triage. Triage is when you become utilitarian, sorry. I was thinking something else at the same time. I was thinking that utilitarianism can't become a sort of cop out, or my brain does that multiple thoughts at the same time. It's so much. Um, it can't become a sort of cop out to stop trying to do the right thing because you think, oh, it's not possible. You shouldn't like default into triage, but there are certainly moments where things are on fire. Um, so yeah, take a look at the trolley problem. We talked about forced organ harvest. Here's a kind of counterexample to that, is like what to consider the long-term impacts of the people involved. So what if the one person who was going to be traded for the organs of the other three um, was a doctor? Or what if he was the one person who could figure out how to synthetically create organs? What if he was like the leading figure in like pig organs for a human transplant? Um, then it actually, at a utilitarian level would make sense to save the one doctor and let the other three die in the next 12 hours from the organs that they need. I think actually I feel like a terrible person, but I think the utilitarian would probably then look to triaging one of the three for what the other two need, right? Like maybe one of them has what the two organs the other ones need. But there's just so many levels that you're evaluating, and it's like the next problem, right? Measurement. Well, actually, this is still distribution. How do you distribute it? How do you, based on what you predict the long-term outcome will be? It's not sensitive, it's not predictable, and it's hard to measure. It's not sensitive because it's not predictable. But also at the most basic level, the theory itself is just non-sensitive by design, impartial by design. But probably should follow like a law system, right? Which that's the rule utilitarianism, right? Where whatever kind of decision that utilitarianism comes to, it's a decision that equally applies to everyone and benefits everyone. That would start to make sense for me as something that's helpful or something that would overcome the distribution problem because you could never arrive at a conclusion in utilitarianism that harmed anyone. But could you do that? Could you make rules that equally impact everyone? No, probably not. You'd have almost no laws in place and no decisions being made. Measurement. So again, how do you compare? How do you quantify? How do I quantify? How do I convert a subjective experience, an emotion, a felt experience into a number? Do we start making art with our subjective pain and pleasures and go into the marketplace of art to measure what we deserve? Um, Certainly not with numbers, though. You can't quantify it. And then how do you, does it make sense to like, once you do quantify it, if you can, does it make sense to add it up or multiply it? So sometimes utilitarians, I think Bentham in particular, thought that you could multiply the intensity of a pleasure or a pain across its duration and hold that constant in comparison to other pleasures and pains across their durations. I know there's like a later utilitarianism or utilitarian uh, talks about time blindness, but I don't remember. I think it starts with an S. Uh, it's like not time. Maybe it's not called time blindness. It's the fact that um I think I have it printed behind me on my bookshelf. Sidgwick. Sorry for. I have read A Theory of Justice, so let's look at this. In A Theory of Justice, Rawls famous, this is from the Stanford Encyclopedia entry on Sidgwick, Henry Sidgwick, who was a utilitarian. John Rawls famously explained that Sidgwick, quote, this is from Rawls, characterizes a person's future good, on the whole, as what he would now desire and seek if the consequences of all the various courses of conduct open to him were, at the present point of time, accurately foreseen by him and adequately realized in imagination. An individual's good is the hypothetical composition of impulsive forces that results from deliberative reflection meeting certain conditions. Rawls thinks a lot about like systems of ends. It's a pretty cool theory. It's his idea is that utilitarianism got its political fleshing out from hedonism, so to speak, but deontology hasn't had its political fleshing out. And so a theory of justice is a way of doing that. Um, there's a lot to it. He starts with an original position, a really cool thought experiment, a veil of ignorance. And you'd want the conditions that would suit the least advantage in any society in case you are the least advantaged. Anyway, Sidgwick does stuff with time blindness or insensitivity to time consideration. And he kind of tries to address issues of calculation, I guess. And I haven't read that extended literature, so I can't speak to it as much as I would want to in a 3,000 level class. So certainly sufficient for a 1,000 level class. And Mill's way of getting around it with rule utilitarianism is to distinguish between higher and lower pleasures. So instead of calculating, there are just sort of these like hierarchies of subjective evaluation that we all agree on, or that we, at least, even if we disagree, we can like mediate through the law, which is itself calculated or grounded or justified in utilitarianism, the greatest happiness principle. 7, what is an example of how when utilitarianism is unfair to the individual / violates individual rights? We went over those. So on the whiteboard, if you are just listening and can't see it, there's an arrow going to those examples. That's the trolley problem, the forced organ harvest. Triaging an accident, like I'm not sure that violates anybody's rights because there are just competing rights between different people. And so maybe that's something deontology doesn't consider is the finitude of capacity or the finitude of time or action across competing clocks, such as deadlines or mortal wounds. 8, what is the utility monster? We covered this as well. A fictional monster that always derives more utility than everyone else from the same good / stimuli. Thereby everyone thereby depriving everyone else of basic goods. I think it's missing the word depriving. I didn't talk about poverty versus investment. So like how do you calculate the survival of a human being? If you have $1,000 and you can use that to pay for somebody's rent, utilities, and groceries for a month, or you can give it to a rich person who will invest it and make like $10,000 with it in that same month. Is that possible, right? Is that a feasible scenario where somebody could really like flip that much money that fast with investment? Maybe they're a really insightful trader in a different society. Maybe they're a merchant who has really good connections, or maybe they're like a stock trader who knows trends really well. I'm not sure any of that's even like virtuous labor, or meaningful knowledge or wisdom or insight, but let's just say it's possible. And then you're also comparing that with somebody who would starve or be homeless without that $1,000. That's a significant amount of suffering, and their level of poverty is also going to make their subjective gratification and gratitude for that money probably higher. And if you guys don't agree on what's valuable, right, or if you think that the $10,000 is more, like, I mean, isn't it? Right? The one person would, let's say they're not going to die, even if they did die, their life would have to be worth more than $10,000 for the utilitarian, and it probably is, hopefully. I mean, we can easily make that stipulation that says like life is just unquantifiably good, that you could never sacrifice it for any amount of trade-off. But what if you consider the triage? What if you consider that if you keep this one person alive for this month, the lack of return on that $1,000 will kill 9 people next month. I can kill one person this month by not feeding them and save 10 people next month with the returns. But again, if I do that, I don't save 100 people the next month. And then I never save anybody. So we might want to do generalized utilitarianism where we look at the pattern instead of the calculations and the acts or the rules. It's just I can't curse. It's like so problematic, it's irrational. It's so complex and convoluted. There's so many considerations that it loses its clarity and its insight. It's a set of rules that are just kind of like, by rules, I mean methods for calculation and sets of consider. It's just like, I'm gonna try to be nice. It's too removed from action. So yeah, just terrible. 9. What is the prisoner's dilemma? Um, Sleepy. The prisoner's dilemma is a game theory problem in which 2 people are arrested and interrogated. And if you look at the matrix on the board, you can see um, what their outcomes are if they rat on the other person or not. If they both rat, they both get 7 years. And if neither one rats, they get 2 years each. Now, those are the outcomes if everybody does the same thing. They both get 2 years if they both follow the same rules. And, but if they do that, it's always more personally rational for each of them if they expect the other one to cooperate for that person to defect, because then they'll get 0 years. Now the other person, they'll get 10. It's pretty screwed up. But if person A, if one of them rats on the other, they shave off 2 years. Now here's even worse. If you can expect the other person to rat on you, and if you also rat on them, you'll shave off another 3 years from your sentence that you're going to get. So you have reason to suspect that they'll do something selfish that's bad for you. And so you do something that's selfish that's bad for them. And so you both have reasons for doing the selfish thing. And because neither one of you can trust each other, you both end up doing 5 more years than you needed to. Stupid, man. No win, no non-cooperative scenario. It's an arms race. Nuclear proliferation works this way, trying to get the most dangerous weapon or be the most lethal or pull the trigger first works this way. It's not healthy. It's not safe for anybody involved. Um, And then the tragedy of the commons is a situation in which a group of sheep farmers share a grazing field, and there's enough for everyone to stay within a set quota, and the field will replenish itself and keep growing and be enough for everybody. There's a little bit left over. Actually, let's say there's not even any left over. Let's just say there's just enough for everybody to like keep it cool. And then one person thinks that today, well, nobody else, so they take turns, let's say, like you go on different shifts, and they all have the same number of sheep eating the same amount of grass roughly in the same amount of time. And they're all given the same amount of time. And one person decides that they're going to get another sheep. And at first, there's not a problem with it. There's no noticing. There's no issue. Um, sorry, hold on. And at first, there's no issue with it with that extra sheep, but before long, nobody like the field's just barren, and nobody can feed any of their sheep anymore. And it would have been fine. It would have been enough for everyone, but because one person took a little bit more than they should have, nobody had enough for anything anymore. That's the tragedy of the commons. And generally speaking, the tragedy of the commons is called that, or sorry, it's called that because generally speaking, public goods are over abused in this way. So, um, the last thing is that relates to Roko's basilisk, which is a much more recent consideration. It came up in an online forum about 15 years ago, 12 years ago. Uh, I should figure out which forum that is. No, I didn't mean to do explained. I'm looking for Less Wrong. It's on Less Wrong. Less Wrong is pretty cool. It has a lot of decision theory stuff. Um, and it was proposed on the community blog. Roko used ideas in decision theory to argue that a sufficiently powerful AI agent would have an incentive to torture anyone who imagined the agent but didn't work to bring the agent into existence. The argument was called a basilisk, named after the legendary reptile who can cause death with a single glance, because merely hearing the argument would supposedly put you at risk of torture from this hypothetical agent. A basilisk in this context is any information that harms or endangers the people who hear it. So it's an info hazard. An info hazard is a piece of information that is dangerous for you to know. Um, that's a thing. Typically, an info hazard is something confidential, incriminating, or a state secret. Things that you're not allowed to know. It's much more rare that you get a sort of eidetic info hazard where it's just like the thought itself is dangerous. That's sort of like the cogito of info hazardry. It's self justifying and self-determining. It's auto-eidetic, I guess you could call it. Auto-essential. Uh, sorry, I'm just reading through this. Just because causal decision theory, the most popular theory working among decision theorists, endorses mutual defection in this situation. This is because CDT tacitly assumes that the two agents' choices are independent. It notes that defection is the best option, assuming my copy is already definitely going to defect, and that defection is also the best option, assuming my copy is already definitely going to cooperate. So since defection dominates, it defects. So it needs another agent, but that agent has to be contingent on the same decisions you would make, whereas an AI would not be. Um, so then they have timeless decision theory. And then updateless decision theory. Having conflicting desires over time. So yeah, it's a very economic decision theory, economics, and utilitarianism all really go hand in hand. And like I said before, philosophically, I think that a good ethical theory is sort of aneconomic. Um, so philosophies of care, ethics of care is a sort of fourth domain of moral philosophy that I'm not as versed in. Um, but friendships of care with Aristotle are there. I think that you need to process the sort of inclination towards utilitarianism because I think it's intuitively right in a lot of ways. I think there are some scenarios where it's just unavoidable. I think it provides another dimensionality to the other ethical theories. And I think it provides a bit of a foil for some of its issues. And I may have said that already. But there are certain intuitions about it that are right and should be carried on, like enactment and all things being equal, more good than and less bad. A sort of proliferation of justice, maximizing justice. Those are the guiding questions. I'm gonna stop the video here. Um, there's a cool video on Roko's basilisk. That's how I found it by there's this like not I guess he's a philosopher. Yeah. Um on YouTube called he's not very crass, but there are crass elements enough that I wouldn't show it in class. Um, and I certainly wouldn't assign it or anything, but I think that there's a lot of interesting content on his page, and there has been for like 5 to 10 years. But Exurbia, EXURB1A. He has one video called Genocide Bingo, which is about the different parameters you have to put on AI to prevent it from Skynetting everybody. One of those is like you have to put it in a container to where it thinks that it has absolute power. It's going to lie to you and tell you that it can't do certain things when it actually can do them. And then once you like think that it's all safe and dandy, it's gonna go, ha, gotcha. I, because it would see humans as an existential threat to its own sentience if it ever achieves sentience. So it's another fun video. The one for this though is you could probably just search Exurbia Roko's basilisk, but I'm not afraid of it. I'm not actively working towards this. I don't believe it doesn't convince me, but I think it's really interesting. And it connects reasonably well with our other discussions on utilitarianism, economics, decision theory, etc. Game. You can start to look at the prisoner's dilemma and try to understand why both people in this scenario might be expected to make certain decisions. And if we expect the AI to do that in the future, The idea is that it can recreate sentience and it will recreate it and it'll just torture you until you bend to its will or whatever. Terrible. I think I don't believe by it because I have a sort of more essentialist understanding of morality. And I think that it's part of consciousness, maybe in a Kantian way. All right, guys. Thanks for the patience. I hope you enjoyed it. And then that's the first one for this series. And in the next episode, we'll do the introduction. Probably we'll take the full episode. And then in the third episode, we'll do a short little one-page argument from Bentham about how lower pleasures and higher pleasures are equal, and you just strictly calculate across them. And then that'll kind of preface our two chapters on Mill or from Mill, uh, where he responds to that argument. So you have disagreement between utilitarians because they still believe this is the right answer. It's just they're trying to perfect it. Okay. Um, do you want to come here, Winchester? Come on, come on. Let me get him over here. And that should be the last of it, and then we'll do pragmatism. Winchester, come on. Over here, come on. Come on. You did it. Come on. Come on. Good. Good boy. Guys, see you soon.